beautiful souls. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Carolyn and this channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. I highly recommend subscribing because this channel is definitely a vibe. During his 5-month reign of terror along the I-5, Randall Woodfield committed an insanely high amount of crimes in such a short period of time. But Randall's crimes were not confined to this 5-month period. Randall had been showing disturbing behavior for years, and he always got away with it. He didn't get away with it because he was some criminal mastermind. No, he got away with it because of his athletic abilities. Because he had been committing crimes and not being held responsible for any of them, eventually his crimes would escalate to murder. Randall was born December 26, 1950 in Salem, Oregon. He was the third child in an upper-class family. His mother was a stay-at-home mom who took care of the kids and the household, and his father was an executive at a telephone company. He had 2 older sisters. One of them ended up becoming a doctor, and the other one became a lawyer, which to a lot of parents would seem very ideal. The problem is this family comes with a third child who happens to be a serial killer. When Randall was younger, he did not do very well in school education-wise, but he was an absolutely amazing athlete and he attended Newport High School. Under the surface, though, there were disturbing reports of sexual misconduct and indecent exposure. Randall's first arrest came in high school, where he was arrested for exposing himself to a group of young teen girls. And unfortunately, as we hear so many times, nothing was done about this because nobody wanted, say it with me, to ruin a young man's life. And I never understand in these situations why nobody is concerned with the young girls' lives being ruined. And just to be clear, no one is ruining these young men's lives. These young men are the men ruining their own lives. The sole responsibility lies with them. But these incidents in his case were covered up because he was good at football and they wanted him to keep playing football. Randall's parents did send him to a therapist, but it wasn't very effective because the therapist's opinion was that his sexually deviant behavior really wasn't that big of a deal, and this could not have been further from the truth. There were no further recorded incidents of him exposing himself to girls. And I don't think that this is because he stopped doing it. It's that the school and the football coach would do anything to protect the football player and make sure that he could continue to play football. Because obviously football would take priority over a young girl being victimized. Really? And the few charges that Randall had accumulated while he was under 18 was all expunged once he turned 18. Soon as he turned 18, he had a clear record, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. After graduating from high school in 1969, Randall attended Treasure Valley Community College in Ontario, Oregon. His crimes did continue, and he was charged with vandalizing an ex-girlfriend's apartment. But he was later released for lack of evidence. In 1970, Randall transferred to Oregon State University. When he began school there, he got involved in Christian groups that were at the college, and he declared himself as a born-again Christian. Now, whether this was genuine and he was actually trying to live a good life and not commit crimes, and maybe that was a way that he could do it, but I think more likely it was something he could use as a cover. He continued his football career playing for the Portland University Vikings, and he played the position of wide receiver. He did not get along well with any of his teammates. They all looked at him as lazy and vain, and they would say he was too afraid to get hit because he was worried that it would somehow damage his good looks. And he seemed to care a lot more about how he looked on the field rather than how he was playing the game. In contrast to this, the coach of the team just thought he was absolutely wonderful. Randall would quite often stop by the coach's office just to chat and, see how he was doing, and he was very friendly, and they would have, nice interactions. If there's one thing Randall knows, he knows who is going to be the person to protect him from his criminal charges. His teammates, they're not going to be able to do anything to protect him. Football coaches, however, are very skilled at hiding the sexual crimes of the players on the team so that they can keep them playing football. And some criminals have a very hard time acting normal in normal situations, but most criminals are chameleons. They're very good at, in this particular situation, I know I need to act a certain way. Then when I am on my own and no one's looking, I can be as evil as I want. And one thing that Randall was very, very good at was playing this chameleon. He could become whatever people needed him to be if it would benefit him. Now, it was only if it would benefit him. Like, that was the only thing that mattered, is what benefited him. Randall's sick obsession with exposing himself to girls began to escalate even further during this period. He was arrested for public indecency in 1972 and again in 1973. By 1974, he had been accused of indecent exposure more than a dozen times, but every time there was no repercussions for him and no charges were ever filed because he was a football player and they needed to protect the team. Please insert dramatic eye roll. A year before graduating college, Randall decided to drop out so he could pursue a professional football career. In 1974, Randall was drafted to the Green Bay Packers. He was offered a salary of $16,000. With inflation, that would be about $100,000 today, plus he would also get bonuses. But Randall never made it past training camp and was cut from the team for low performance and quite a number of incidents that had been reported of indecent exposure, which again, he was never charged for any of these. After he was dropped by the Green Bay Packers, he was picked up by the semi-pro Manitowoc Chiefs, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. I'm sure that I am. But he was let go by the Chiefs at the end of the season. No reason was given, but over that year, there had been another 10 reports of him indecently exposing himself to girls. Again, he was not charged with any of those crimes either. And like, bro, nobody wants to see your little Willy. Like, this guy is giving small dick energy harder than I have ever seen in my entire life. No one wants to see your pee-pee. And I think sometimes with indecent exposure, I think sometimes people can think that maybe it's not that serious of a crime. I personally experienced this when I was 13 years old, and me and a friend of mine were on a bus and a grown man exposed his penis to us. And it was the first time either of us had ever seen an adult penis. Like, I had babysat and changed diapers and stuff, but I had never seen a grown man's penis and I'm just this kid on a bus and this man is in front of me. And for me, I think it didn't affect me as severely, but I can tell you, my friend who was with me, it was something extremely traumatic, and it was something that really affected her for quite a long time. And I just want to make sure that indecent exposure isn't being downplayed just because there's no physical contact. So when he was let go from that team, he was devastated because no team found any value in him, and seems legit. He knew his football career was over. Randall then moved to Portland, Oregon, where he got a job as a bartender. And he would constantly, every night, whether he was working, if he was not working, he was going out, and he would spend absolutely every night trying to convince a woman to go home with him. And no women wanted to. And he really couldn't understand it because he considered himself very good looking. So to him, he thinks, well, if I'm good looking, I can get any woman I want. Shocker, no, you can't. And I'm not in any way suggesting that he was an incel because I have no information as to whether he was, but he really gives off that kind of incel energy where he thinks I'm good looking, so women should fall at my feet. Where reality check, my man, he's super hot, but I'll tell you, if he didn't have a good personality, if he wasn't an amazing person, if he wasn't hilarious, if he didn't treat me respectfully, kindly, lovingly, I would have nothing to do with him. You can be as good looking as you want as a man, but women are not going to be attracted to you solely based off your appearance. And I think in his case, the only thing he cared about was if the woman he was pursuing was good looking. So to him, if a woman was good looking, that was the perfect person to date. It didn't matter her personality. It didn't matter anything else about her, her morals, her anything. Nothing mattered but what she looked like. So he's thinking, well, women should be looking at me, seeing I'm good looking, and that's all that should matter. But welcome to reality. That's not all that matters. That's not even number one on most people's list of what they look for in a partner. He not only thought he was good looking, but he was obsessed with his body and his physique. And he would have professional photos taken of him naked. So he decides to send these pictures to Playgirl, and he thinks he's going to send these pictures to Playgirl, and Playgirl's going to lose their mind over how gorgeous and amazing his body is. Well, yeah, Playgirl, they weren't interested because he wasn't that special. And normally I wouldn't speak about people in this manner, but I know what this guy goes on to do, so yeah, he wasn't that special. And women weren't interested in him because they were afraid of him. If he would say, go to a bar and get a woman's number, he would become obsessed with her. He would call her constantly. He'd show up at her home. He started showing up at people's works. He was acting really creepy. And people, all of these women, they were listening to their intuition, and their intuition was telling them, stay the hell away from this guy because he is creepy and not a safe person. He did end up finding a couple of women that agreed to move in with him. They would meet and he would instantly ask them to move in. They would move in and then he would cheat on them. And obviously in his mind, the cheating was the woman's fault. He was going out and cheating, but the woman, it was her fault. He was cheating. So yeah, he wasn't successful with women, and I think we can pretty much gather that from this. In 1975 in Portland, there was a string of violent assaults. The perpetrator would demand oral sex from the women, and he would also rob them of any money or possessions that they had. The perpetrator was described as a tall, very good-looking man, and he would always have a knife with him. He was using the knife. That's what he would use to threaten them. In early March Detectives decided to set up a sting operation to see if they could catch this guy. So an undercover police officer, who was a woman who was young and attractive, they just had her walking through a park. There was a particular area that he targeted quite often. So her job would just be to go and walk along the trails in this park. And obviously there's police everywhere standing by. They're just hoping that the attacker will try to hurt this undercover policewoman. And as expected, Randall emerged from the bushes with a knife demanding money from the undercover policewoman. And he was very quickly arrested. During interrogation, Randall told police that he had impulse control and sexually deviant behavior. Duh, like we all know that. And that's not an excuse. Good try. He also claimed to police that he was addicted to steroids and that everything was to blame on the fact that he was addicted to steroids. And the police called BS on that real quick. In April 1975, he pled guilty to second-degree robbery and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Unfortunately, he was out after only 4 years. And as soon as he got out of prison, he was eager to get back to committing the crimes that he had been committing prior. While Randall had been in prison, he had a pen pal. And it wasn't like some weirdo who's like obsessed with criminals and like writing to prisoners or whatever. It's nothing like that. This is actually someone that he had known. It was a woman. They had gone to elementary school together. Like they had known each other since elementary school and then gone through elementary all the way through to high school. And they had connected again at the 10-year high school reunion. And they had both worked on the committee for the high school reunion and become friends. But it was never a intimate relationship. It was always a very platonic friendship. So she would write to him while he was in prison. Her name was Cherie Ayers and she was 29 years old. While Randall was in prison, Cherie had completed a program to become an x-ray technician and she was working at 2 separate clinics in Northern Oregon. On October 11th, 1980, Cherie was found dead in her apartment by her fiance. Her face and body had been beaten extremely viciously, and she had also been stabbed several times in the neck. Police were unsure if she had been R-worded or not. There was possible semen found at the scene, but this is before DNA, so if police were to find semen at a crime scene, the only comparison they could do was they could find out the blood type and try to compare it to their suspect. So that's exactly what they did. They got the blood type of the semen and compared it to Randall, and it was not a match. So he was just let go. Randall had just got away with his first murder. And we know this because in 2005, 25 years after Cherie had been murdered, her mother asked the police department to do a DNA comparison of the semen that was found at the scene with Cherie, and it was a perfect match to Randall. Near the end of 1980, Randall was still high off the fact that he had committed a murder and got away with it, and he decided that he wanted to do this again. This time, he planned to kill an ex-girlfriend of a friend of his, and her name was Darcey Fix, and she was 22 years old. It's unclear why he chose Darcey specifically, but as his crimes will continue, it seems as though the victims don't really matter to him. It doesn't really matter to him who the victim is. He doesn't seem, if she's a young woman, she fits into what he's looking for. So as to why specifically he chose Darcey, it's unclear. Randall broke into Darcey's home. Darcey and 24-year-old Douglas Altig were found bound and shot to death in Darcey's home. Now, Randall had no plan of killing Douglas. He only killed him because he happened to be there when he had planned to go in to kill Darcey. And as far as we know, this is the only man that he murdered. And while Darcey and Randall had a lot of mutual friends, police very quickly ruled Randall out as a suspect. Randall had now gotten away with 3 murders. And we know this because in 2009, similar to the previous murder, DNA test was done proving that he had killed both of them. Randall's crime spree continued and escalated. He committed a string of armed robberies along the I-5, giving him the name the I-5 Bandit. On December 21st, Randall went into a restaurant and he forced a waitress at gunpoint to give him oral sex. He also stole all the money that was in the register. He was committing crimes and he was leaving witnesses to all of these crimes. Now, he did attempt to wear disguises, but they weren't very good disguises. He would just put on like a fake beard, and when victims would be speaking with police, they would clearly say he was wearing a fake beard. No one was looking at his fake beard thinking it was an actual beard. He was brought in again as a suspect in some of these crimes, but again, he was released because the police lacked any physical evidence. On January 8th, Randall returned to a store that he had robbed a month prior. This time, at gunpoint, he forced the cashier to expose herself to him, as well as giving her all of the money that they had at the store. Just 4 days later, on January 12th, he robbed another store where he had essayed the female worker and robbed the store. Then on January 14th, only 2 days later, someone matching the I-5 Bandit description broke into a home and essayed an 8-year-old and 10-year-old girl. Only 4 days later, on January 18th, he decides to go into an office building to hunt for his next victim. Cherie Hull, who was a 20-year-old cleaner at the office building, was getting ready to finish her shift when she was grabbed by the arm by Randall and forced at gunpoint down a hallway. As they walked, another cleaner, Beth Wilmot, who was only 20 years old, was forced as well at gunpoint to continue down the hallway. He forced the 2 women into a back room. He essayed both of them and shot both of them in the head. Shari Hull died instantly. Beth, however, did not. But Beth was smart enough to play dead. And this comes up quite a few times in true crime. If you are ever shot at, attacked, anything, play dead. Just play dead, because there's so many stories that I've read of where a victim will play dead and the perpetrator thinks, okay, I've killed the witness, I'm free to go. And then they end up getting medical help and surviving. So yeah, if you're attacked, dead dog, do it. Beth, however, did not die, but she did play dead. So Randall ended up leaving, believing that he had killed both women. Beth, as soon as she believed that Randall had left, called 911 immediately, and she was able to give the police a very good description. And this description matched the I-5 Bandit that had been committing so many crimes that the police had been searching for quite a while. Police were becoming very overwhelmed by these crimes because of how quickly they were happening. Like, some days he would only go 1 day between killings. Sometimes he would go 2 days. Then he may go 4 days. But it was crime after crime after crime constantly. So the police were just struggling, trying to keep up with with the amount of crimes that he was committing. On February 3rd, 1981, just 3 weeks after the murder of Shari Hull, 2 more victims were found. The bodies of Donna Eckert and her 14-year-old daughter, Janelle Jarvis, were both found deceased in their home. Donna and her daughter were the only 2 people home at the time of the murders. Donna's husband, Steve, had left a few hours earlier to do a 24-hour shift at the fire station. He was a firefighter. Their youngest daughter, Kristen, had been at a friend's house. When Kristen arrived home just after 9 p.m., she walked in the house calling out to her mother and sister, expecting them to be there, and she noticed that she was yelling for them. Nobody was responding, and she expected that they would be there. So she started looking around the house to see where her mother and her sister were, without knowing the absolutely horrific scene she was about to walk in on. Kristen walked into her parents' bedroom, and on the bed were both her mother and her sister, who were bound and had been shot several times. It was later discovered that Janelle, the daughter, had been sodomized post-mortem. So sick. If I was a judge, it would be death for him, just simply for that. It's so disgusting. You're going to violate this young girl's body after you have taken her life. It's just... Detectives immediately did suspect that this crime had been committed by the I-5 Bandit, but the 2 victims would not be added to the official victims list for another 40 years. On the very same day, Randall had held up a store and had kidnapped and R-worded the female worker in the store. A nearly identical crime was reported in Wairika the exact same day. So this man in one day had committed 2 murders, and then he had kidnapped and R-worded 2 other females. I just hope prison treats this man to the same brutality that he treated these poor women and girls. They're not all overage, just sick shit. 5 days later, he held up another store and essayed another female worker. And again, detectives knew that this was all linked to the I-5 Bandit. They just could not catch him. On February 12th, Randall committed armed robbery in Vancouver, Olympia, and Bellevue, Washington, all in the same day. And the robberies, again, were identical. Randall, again, living in complete delusion that any woman would fall at his feet, when the reality was women were terrified of this man because he was super creepy. He decided for Valentine's in 1981, he would invite all of these women to a party, and all of these women were going to show up for him. So he sends out a text. Okay, no, there wouldn't have been text. How do we communicate back then? I was alive. Wait, how do we communicate before texting? Phone. Yeah, he would call. I think he called them. Okay, so sorry about that. I got confused on how you contact people. I think he phoned all the women. He contacted all of these women, a whole bunch of them. I think there was like 20 of them, trying to get them all to show up at this hotel party that he was going to have. And then he thought, oh, all these women were going to show up and I don't know, we're going to be in love with him. Well, shocker, not a single woman showed up because they all thought he was a creepy weirdo, because he was. And Randall, he was furious. He was furious that not a single one of these women had shown up. That night, Randall drove to a home of an 18-year-old girl named Julie Wright, who he had previously met at a bar. Randall had arrived unexpectedly, but when Julie answered the door, she let him in and they had a glass of wine together. Randall then attacked, R-worded, and killed Julie. It was clear Julie had put up a really, really good fight. So at least she fought as hard as she could. But unfortunately, she didn't survive. Neil Loper and Dave Bishop were the detectives assigned to Julie's homicide. They noticed right away that this had a lot of similarities between the I-5 Bandit crimes that had been committed. So at this point, a task force was formed to try to identify who the I-5 Bandit was. Within days of the beginning of investigating Julie's murder, Randall was brought up quite quickly. So detective decided that they were going to focus on Randall Woodfield because he had so many connections to so many of the victims. There were a lot of victims he had no association with, but his name kind of kept popping up. So they decided they were going to zero in and start focusing on him and finding out more about him. The first stop was going and speaking with his parole officer. The parole officer immediately brought up to detectives Randall's deep-seated resentment towards all women. She also told the police officer that he had moved without telling her, and obviously on parole, you need permission to move. She also told them about the 3 unsolved murders that she knew he had a connection to. And these 3 were Cherie Ayers, Darcey Fix, and Douglas Altig. And I'm just wondering if the parole officer had all this information. I couldn't find anything, because I would think as a parole officer, if you're saying I've got someone who has moved and don't have permission to do so or didn't inform me of it. Also, he has a connection to these 3 unsolved murders. I don't understand, why would the parole officer not have brought this to the police's attention? Now, I will say I don't know for sure that she didn't bring it to police's attention. She may very well have brought it to the police's attention, and maybe she was told, don't worry about it, or we'll look into it, or whatever. But I just found it really strange that all of a sudden they talked to the parole officer, and she's got a lot of information that's very useful. Finally, on March 3rd, 1981, Randall Woodfield was arrested. He was arrested on suspicion of multiple murders, on multiple R-words, multiple robberies, and multiple indecent exposure. Randall was interrogated by the police, and a search warrant was executed on his apartment. When his apartment was searched, they found an array of all kinds of different disguises. They were also able to match tape that he had in his apartment with tape that had been, some of the victims had been bound with. Just 4 days after his arrest, police had done multiple lineups, and victims very, very easily were able to pick him out of the lineup. And one of the people that was able to pick him out was Beth Wilmot, who he had shot and thought he had killed, but she had survived. By March 16th, he was charged with first-degree murder, essay charges, attempted kidnapping, armed robbery, illegal possession of firearms, all of this across various jurisdictions. In Salem, Randall went on trial for the murder of Shari Hull and the attempted murder of Beth Wilmot. He was also charged in that case with 2 counts of sodomy. Beth testified at the trial against Randall, and she went on to describe how the crime had impacted her, how difficult it had been since this had happened. And she also spoke a lot about the loss that she felt from her coworker and her friend, Shari Hull, who had been murdered. On June 26, 1981, Randall was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 165 years. In October of that year, he went on trial for the robberies that he had committed along the I-5, and he was sentenced to 35 years in prison for those robberies. Despite his links to countless other murders, Oregon decided not to prosecute him for those crimes simply because it would be too expensive for the state to be able to go through and do that many trials. Now, there is a possibility that he could get parole. I think it's extremely, extremely unlikely, but the Oregon police are very quick to say if it ever seemed like a possibility that he would get parole, they have all their ducks in a row and they are ready and they could go to trial and keep him in prison so he would never get out of prison. Well, he had only been charged with 4 murders. It is suspected that he had murdered 44 women, and he is suspected in 60 different SA cases. And as for today, Randall is still in prison, rotting away where he should be. And that is the end of today's story. Thank you so much for being here with me. I appreciate you guys so much. You have no idea how much your support means to me. And if you would like to support the channel, please stick around and watch another video. And I will see you in a couple days with a new video that is Halloweeny. Have an amazing day, beautiful souls.